to renounce the throne for myself and my descendants, and we desire that that effect should be given to this instrument of abdication immediately. When King Edward VIII wrote these words in December of 1936, it was the first voluntary abdication of the throne in England or Great Britain ever. People just don't give up being king, and it caused a crisis. People just don't leave the throne, or at least they hadn't. Usually it's the other way around. Everyone is trying to be king. People kill or die to be king. They don't just give up power and wealth and walk away. The abdication of Edward was shocking, even for love, which is generally given a pass in just about everything. It is good to be king. Who wouldn't want to be king? Medieval Japan, however, was a completely different situation. When I looked up things about abdication, I learned that emperors in Japan routinely abdicated the throne by choice. It was a custom, usually after about 10 years of service. And from a Western perspective, this is completely puzzling. Why would you voluntarily give up the throne? Why wouldn't you want to stay in power? Well, it turns out that the throne is not where the power existed in medieval Japan. The emperor was mostly occupied by long religious and political ceremonies that were very physically demanding, and from what I understand from reading about them, really, really boring. After 10 years of doing that, it was deemed that the emperor had earned a pampered retirement, along with more power behind the scenes than they had ever experienced on the throne. Maybe most of the emperors at that time ascended the throne as 6 or 8 years old, and they were retired by the time that they were teenagers. It's not that they didn't want to be in power, it's just that the power was located very differently in medieval Japan than it was in Europe. Different cultures sometimes don't make very much sense at first glance. Good manners in one country can be unspeakably rude in another. I know this because my Minnesotan tendency to say lengthy goodbyes and explain to everyone why I am leaving has caused a great deal of awkwardness in other cultures in the past. Political structures vary greatly, even when they're called the same thing. Even when the systems seem much the same, the power in the system is sometimes located somewhere entirely other than you might expect. When we enter another culture, sometimes we don't really know what to make of the differences. Sometimes we don't even know that there are differences until we've misstepped, or until some event jolts us into realization that all is not as it seems. I sometimes wonder if the people who were with Jesus sometimes thought that they had stumbled into an entirely foreign country. Even though he came from the same place that they did, even though he spoke the same language and was raised with the same customs, every time they turned around, he was doing something unexpected. And just when they think that they understand where the power is, Jesus turns everything on its head. Now, prior to this passage in John, Jesus is walking around with his disciples, and he's healing people, and he's teaching. Strange things are happening. Now, word has gotten out that he's been healing people, and so crowds of people start to follow him. And there's power there, and people tend to follow power. And they're expecting him to do what most humans would do in this situation, to keep doing more and better miracles, to use the power to surround himself with the crowds and grow his influence. But just when they think we know what Jesus will do, he takes his disciples and disappears up a mountain. And then, about the time that the disciples start to think that they understand what's happening, that Jesus has taken to impart some great wisdom to them alone, Jesus flips everything again and takes this small amount of bread and fish and feeds this enormous crowd of people who happen to be the same people that he was just running away from. But that doesn't seem to matter. Jesus wants everyone to eat and live and thrive. Now, after something so miraculous, you can hardly blame the people for their reaction. Aha! We have found it! This is the prophet who wants to come! I know! Let's make him a king! Who wouldn't want to be king? Well, it turns out, Jesus runs away from being king, takes off without even his disciples, up mountain by himself. But lest you think that he's running away from power, period, the next time that you see him, he's walking across waves in the sea in a storm. The people around Jesus were always a step behind, always not quite getting it. They were constantly misstepping and finding that the power he had was not as it seemed to be. It's as if Jesus came from an entirely different culture, a foreign country where nothing was as they expected. And indeed, I think that that is exactly the case. That the culture, if you will, that Jesus represented and instilled wherever he went, operates on an entirely different set of rules than the structures that humans have created. There is a sense in which Jesus' country parallels ours and moves within it, but it also transforms it, turning our values and desires and expectations on their head. Things that we think are impossible happen. Small, insignificant things and small, insignificant people become the greatest of miracles. Especially when it comes to power. If you pay any attention to Jesus at all, it quickly becomes clear that his ideas about power are almost completely opposite of most of ours. In this country that Jesus calls the reign of God, the poor are rich. The blind see. The enslaved are free. The hungry eat. The sick are healed. The first are last, and the last are first. Even those who die may yet live. And Jesus makes it clear to us that this country, as foreign as it may seem, is not actually somewhere else. This country is the real world, here and now, waiting for us to notice it and realize that we are a part of it. So, that's a lovely picture. But what does it have to do with us, practically speaking? Well, for me lately, I felt particularly challenged by this unsettling Jesus, who doesn't seem to operate within the structures that make up most of my life. When I open my eyes and really look around me, I realize that nearly everything that I do contributes to a structure that is the opposite of what Jesus lived and taught, the opposite of all the things that I claim to value in my life. The clothes I wear and the food I eat and the ways that I live, the ways that I transport myself, all of it is tied to systems that affect the world around me, far beyond my own little bubble. I am bound to a global economy that currently uses resources at a rate that is far beyond sustainable, that treats people as commodities, that destroys the earth without care for those who come after us, that abuses and marginalizes those who are most powerless, that gives more and more and more to those who are already wealthy, while leaving others without even the most basic needs of food and water and shelter. This is a world that takes much and makes very little. that Jesus refused to be king of. And so I do not believe that this is the world of Jesus, who fed 5,000 people with a little bit of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus, who always took little and made much, invites us to be part of. And so I want to extend this invitation to all of us to think together as individuals and as a faith community about our values and our actions, to see clearly the way that we contribute to structures that do not embody the values of the reign of God, to let Jesus challenge us to live differently, to engage the powers of this world with the power of the reign of God, to take what we have been given, no matter how small, and make much with it, so that all may live and thrive. You may have noticed lately that we've been using something called the ACRA Confession as our affirmation of faith. In 2004, the World Alliance of Reformed Churches, which is a global fellowship of Reformed and Presbyterian denominations, met in Accra, Ghana. And during this meeting, they traveled to the coast, to 2 former castles that had been used. The bottom levels of them had been used as dungeons to hold slaves who were waiting for auction and to be shipped to the United States. And above were the living quarters of the wealthy slave owners and traders, and the church where they worshiped. Reformed Christians, like all of us, stood and worshiped God in this church while literally beneath their feet, people starved in chains and waited to be sold like objects. The delegates at the Accra Assembly wondered, how could these people's faith be so distant from real life? How could they separate their spiritual experience from the suffering of those who were literally right beneath them? How could they be so blind? But as the delegates mourned that particular phase in Christian history and heard the voices from around the globe speak of their current experience, they realized that we are in danger of repeating the same sin of blindness all over again. For today's world is still divided between those who worship in comfortable contentment and those who are enslaved by the world's economic injustice and ecological destruction, those who still suffer and die while others stand by. And so they wrote this confession, which I encourage you to go and look up and read in full. I will not read it in full to you. It is a challenge and a pledge. And I want to leave you with a few sections of it today. We affirm that global economic justice is essential to the integrity of our faith and our discipleship as Christians. We believe in God, creator and sustainer of all life, who calls us as partners in the creation and redemption of the world. We live under the promise that Jesus Christ came so that all might have love, life, and fullness. Guided and upheld by the Holy Spirit, we open ourselves to the reality of the world. Therefore, we reject the current world economic order imposed by global neoliberal capitalism and any other economic system, including absolute planned economies which defy God's covenant by excluding the poor, the vulnerable, and the whole of creation from the fullness of life. We believe the economy exists to serve the dignity and well-being of people in community within the bounds of the sustainability of creation. We reject the unregulated accumulation of wealth and limitless growth that has already cost the lives of millions and destroyed much of God's creation. We believe that God is a God of justice. Now we proclaim with passion that we will commit ourselves, our time and our energy, to changing, renewing, and restoring the economy and the earth, choosing life, so that we and our descendants may live. Will we too commit ourselves to this? Will we too choose life? In the name of the Creator and the Redeemer and Sustainer, Amen.